Cool. So I kind of want to give an overview of the past 5 years of my work, and then towards the end, I'm going to go more into detail about the show that's up at the Red Mill. But the basis of my work considers my relationship through my body and the body politic to metal music and its culture. I think of metal music as an umbrella with every single one of its spokes representing a divergent idea in the culture. In the past 25 years, I've either been in or tangential to the metal scene in various cities. The one thing I have found true in what I've experienced in the metal scene is it has transformed itself. It's it's more intellectual, it's ideologically fractured, it's also sonically and visually more experimental. In a sense, it's not longer completely concerned with Satanism, pure evil, or the nihilistic indifferent for correction. Though this is not a complete break from the past, the signifiers in metal are still really important. And now the way I see it, it's become personal, more about the individual's beliefs and what they add to the story of metal. It's important for me through my work to use the iconography of early metal because I do want my work to be rooted in history. But as I said, to make it personal, to make it mine, I like to think that I add a feminist mysticism to the work. And an idea in my shows, I want to lure a willing audience into my fanatical sermon, represented in my work that points towards esoteric aesthetics employed by metal itself. Let's see, things are moving a lot faster than I thought. With this, I kind of focused on how metal represented women and how I feel like up until I started making work, I was rarely seeing women represented the way I thought they should be represented. They're either represented in violent ways or seen as weak. And so my goal was to show women in a unique and utter powerful manner, women in the throes of birth. And so in all these images, there are birthing images, and I kind of use the semiotics of the metal back patch, the screen print, also how in bands, the banner behind the drummer. And I kind of created this band called Crowning, hence you can see there in the metal script. I kind of got this idea in the beginning because a friend who was going, after the birth of her first child, she told me something that really stuck with me. She said, it was bloody, it felt like my body was getting ripped apart, there was primeval sounds coming out of me, and I didn't know that I could make those sounds, but I did it. And so in a sense, I kind of wanted to latch onto that idea of that's my heroine. A woman giving birth should be the woman represented in metal because there is blood, there is violence, but at the end of it, it comes life. And so after kind of that body of work, my work kind of took a sharp turn, mainly because I wasn't able to make art for about a year, but I did have time to read and kind of listen to as much metal music as I want. Similar to kind of what's happening now with COVID, come to think of it, we kind of all have a little bit more time to do things that we didn't think we had time to do. I started reading, at the time, I kind of started reading more lyrics from bands that I liked, kind of seeing what they're actually saying in their songs besides the growls. So I started looking at bands like Cattle Decapitation, which if y'all have heard that, they're from Chicago, or not Chicago, they're from California. And their songs are all about the mistreatment of animals and the abuse of the environment caused by factory farming. There's also Wolves in the Throne Room, who talks about the human complicity into the environment and the inaction that the humans have in changing, or the inaction in climate change, really. Ahab, which they're a band that kind of talks about the sublime of the seas, the power of the oceans, as well as the ocean's destructions by human. During this time, I consumed books. Carol Clover's Men, Women, and Chainsaw, which kind of focused on gender in the horror films and kind of placing, or kind of thinking about the engagement of the viewer and the plight of the victim hero, who's usually a female body, who suffers pain and fright, but at the end they're able to overcome and vanquish the forces that are oppressing them, or the killer, of course. Other books, Caliban and the Witch, which is a feminist history of capitalism and history, definitely grounded in Marxism, but they talk about the peasant revolts, the proletariat revolts, witch hunts, and kind of recontextualize it through a feminist lens, kind of in a way how so much of history is written by the winner, but what if we actually start talking about where history is written by the people who weren't allowed to have a voice back then? It's a great book. Two other books that I feel like started transitioning into making this newer work that you're seeing slide through is In the Dust of This Planet, Eugene Thacker, Tim Morton's Hyperobjects. And with Hyperobjects, there's actually a great quote that I read from him that really describes, I think, his philosophy very well, if y'all haven't heard of him. But he likes to take the present to mean the last 12,000 years. And so that kind of made me start thinking about my position in the state of the earth right now, and kind of thinking bigger and where that comes from. Like in this work you're seeing up here, that's all bleached coral that I got printed on the fabric. And so kind of thinking about how bleached dead coral is already having this language of metal. There's already an empathy or entropy happening in it. But also thinking about how in metal font, there's a language being told that's meant for the initiated. But what is the dead coral telling you about the initiated of who knows that language? So here's two examples of that you're seeing. I think in reading all these books, and I'll throw in Donna Haraway's Staying with the Trouble, kind of thinking about these books, thinking about lyrics, it started informing me on why I was making this type of work. It was almost like these books and these lyrics were starting to reveal themselves to me, almost like they're initiating me into my future work. Through all these things, I started snaking from one topic to another, telling a story, and it kind of all led me into thinking about what unwritten history is there about demons. And it kind of like demons and demonology and the occult, and also like a feminist viewing of the occult, because so much of that is understood from a male lens, and there's not very much writing from a female lens in it. And so in starting with my rugs, and this is my first rug that I made, I started kind of asking that question to myself and actually gathering books about demonology, the occult, Cornelius Agrippa, all the famous readers of it, and started kind of like trying to read between the lines, like really similar to how Silvia Federici was doing in Caliban and the Witch, how she was trying to find the unwritten story, because no one writes stories about what the proletariats were feeling in the 1500s. And so I'm kind of going in that same manner with this. It's kind of like, if you think about where demons came from, demons used to be spelled D-A-E-M-O-N. It was part of Greek mythology. It was this supernatural being that was responsible for communication between the gods and the humans. And so there were these helpers in life in ancient Rome and ancient Greece. But then somewhere along the way, just like so much of Christianity kind of like taking over paganism religions, it's like demons have also been demonized, D-E-M-O-N. And so I kind of wanted to start making work that told that story. And so thinking about, like here's an example, there's one demon, D-A-E-M-O-N, that's called Mara. And that in ancient Greece was like the demon to help you sleep. Whereas as it transitioned into Christianity, the demon, D-E-M-O-N, it still stayed as Mara, but now the word transitioned to where we got the word nightmare. And then all the associations with nightmare. And so it was kind of important to me in this show that you're seeing all the carpet beaters, which are the ones lining the wall. I tried to find links between the old demons and the new demons, and kind of retell my story with them. Try to think of them as if I was writing the sigil and not Cornelius Agrippa in the 1500s, like what would my sigil be to call on that demon? And in a sense, like even though the rug is the centerpiece, all the magic is in the carpet beater, like all the callings are in the carpet beater, and the rug is more just like the portal to let that in. And then thinking about the rug, I was really interested in how magic circles worked and how magic circles worked as a portal into otherness. And so I was kind of thinking of that as like my game board, like similar to how there's a Ouija board and that's a portal to something. It's like, this is my portal to call on my demons to come in there. And so in a whole sense, like this show is trying to give voice to something that in the past was considered demonic. In a sense, I kind of want to think about the heretic, the witch, the foreigner, the scientist, the scholar, the hermit. All of these bodies were historically bodies that were a point of contempt and demonized. The witch huntings, like I don't know if everyone knows this, so I'm not going to assume that, but like for the most part, witches never existed. They were just women and men who chose to live differently. And so if we think about that the same way we think about demons, what if demons were just the scholar who challenged if the world was flat, and now somehow their name got associated with a demon, and then hence a new mythos is surrounded by them, but no one writes that story. And so all I'm trying to do in my work is kind of try to find those moments and endnotes and footnotes in all my readings to try to make links. And a lot of times I am kind of making up the story. I try to think of it as like I'm making up an educated story, finding all the puzzle pieces. But like I'm kind of interested in just dismantling this demonology and unraveling the heteronormative, like it kind of like the power that's been put on it, and start thinking about demons as like today's others. In the Eugene Thacker book that I mentioned earlier, in The Dust is Planet, he has a really great line that's just 4 words: demons are other people. And that's kind of the beginning where I started thinking about this idea. It was a simple line. He wasn't talking about this, but it instantly solidified this idea that like yesterday's demons are just the people who are ostracized, marginalized, the immigrant, the disabled person, the neurodiverse. Like these are people that today we just see as somehow not fitting in society the way we want to, but 500 years ago, they were demons. And so in a lot of ways, I kind of hope to use this work and use the performative qualities of this work to start talking about this history that should be written about. And this is like kind of cheesy, but I always like ending my presentations like this. There's a demon legion who's famous for saying, I speak as many, we speak as one. And I feel like I really want my work to embody that, especially my current work that I'm doing. And so that's it. I'll kind of like go through the rest of them because I, of course, talk faster than I was expecting. Yeah, easy peasy.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here again. The last time I was here in 2014. All right, so we're going to start right now with an image of a group of brothers that were really influential to me. They're known as the Marx Brothers. And they were a group of Jewish comedians that grew up around the turn of the century. And they were very large in the vaudeville circuit, and then went on to Broadway, and then from there did movies. And so, but I want to focus actually on Groucho Marx. In this lecture, I'll be talking a little bit, I'll be trying to talk about the background of what influences all my different projects. Rather than showing collages or paintings, I'd like to focus on some of the stranger works that I've done, some of the performances. So I latched on to a statement that Groucho Marx made, that for some reason, it's kind of like the riddle of the Sphinx, and explains why my psyche makes art. I refuse to join any club that would have me as a member. And there are many ways you could analyze this. What this refers to actually is when Groucho moved, he actually grew up in Upper East Side of New York City, but later in life he moved to Hollywood. And when he was there, he was convinced to join a Friars Club. And he was all excited to skip out to the Friars Club to speak to people about literature and stuff, but what he found was just a smoke-filled room of people playing poker. So he wound up leaving the Friars Club and then wrote this statement: "I refuse to join any club that would have me as a member." And the reason I like this statement, it, for me, just points to the fact of I have this burning need to constantly change my artistic focus. And once things become too settled, too rote, or too easy, I start to distrust the kind of school that I'm building around me. So I just bring up this statement to kind of how it refers specifically to my practice. Well, this is the first club I was thrown out of. This was a free education at Cooper Union. I made this mural with a friend of mine, and within 8 months I was kicked out of free education. We had a chalkboard, I could possibly, we could return to that statement and figure out how this fits to it. But to my parents who are watching somewhere, it would just sound like the scratching sound of nails going down that very chalkboard. Now, this project started pretty innocently. I met someone who was a sophomore at Cooper Union, and we started doing this project together. He was interested in Fragonard, and we would just start painting together, and we have these frolicking angels and cupids, nude, naked, and frolicking. And this is the 8th floor of Cooper Union. There's an elevator, and in the corner was the president's office. We were so proud of what we did, we signed the top of the elevator with both of our names. In the morning, we were immediately descended upon and brought up to the principal's office. He got to stay and I left. And I finished off at School of Visual Arts. So this next image is from a recent performance from 2017 that was, I was commissioned by Performa 17 to create a performance that was dedicated to Dada's 100th year celebration. And I was tickled pink because between the Marx Brothers and Dadaism has always been this furnace of influence. But it's kind of a tricky thing because Dadaism and many of its philosophers kind of butt into strange Zen riddles. For instance, the writer Tristan Tzara says the true Dada hates Dada. And so in 2017, I was trying to figure out, well, how do I top Dada? And I started to think of things like maybe smashing up normcore with the strange. Well, what you're seeing here is how the performance opens. So what I think of like the idea of we're talking about the tarot, the fool card or the trickster, that archetype. And so this is a group of stand-up comedians. And so I thought like, well, how can you screw up the role of the trickster? So what I did is I had all these stand-up comedians simultaneously deliver their punchline. And so here's a small clip of that. All right, so that's just a short clip of that, where the trickster messes up the tricksters. So the next sequence I'm going to show you is also from this performance People Pie Pool. And essentially, just to explain what People Pie Pool was my attempt to make a Muppet show. So to go through, find all my friends who made kind of strange performances And also find people like, you know, real estate agents and nuclear physicists and mix them all together in a venue. The next sequence you're going to see is I decided I wanted to curate an exhibition of work that was going to be destroyed. So I invited my friends to make work on paper, and I stretched the paper, and here's a clip. So that painting is one by Joe Bradley. Here's another painting by Catherine Bernhard. And here is a painting by Chris Martin. And so all these paintings were destroyed, and then we would show them in the lobby, the destroyed artworks. So as people were leaving the exhibition, they could see these destroyed works. There's the Chris Martin, this is the Chloe Wise, and this is an Eddie Martinez. Now, that's not all. I decided that that wasn't enough. So once these works were destroyed, I decided to feed them into shredders. Now, I don't know if anyone has ever seen this as a kid. As a kid, when I saw my first bag of shredded currency, I went nuts. I don't know why, but then I saw this, a shredded currency pen. And I really went crazy. So I had this idea that what I would do was shred the artworks, the destroyed artworks, put them in pens, and then return them to the artists. So in a certain way to like come full circle and now give that artist their destroyed dregs in a different form to now make more art. Let me consult my notes. Okay. Where are we? All right, so this next section here, these were drawings that were made in the past couple weeks from games of Pictionary at the Perlmans. So this one is called, this is Repeat. I think this one's Lee. Well, I'm gonna go with Bill. This is Menu. Electric chair. I think it's tug or pull. About face. No one got this one. Anyone can guess this one? Crossfire, exactly. This one, I believe, was Fight. You see that punch cloud up in the left corner. Anyone can guess this? I think it's a biblical story. That's it. Belt. I'm not sure what this was. Ochbidgigan. Pegasus. Tilt. Gray. Not sure what this is, but you can tell there's a lot of fury in the mark making. Like, come on, stupid, don't you understand what the storm of scribbles means? There's something I really like about Pictionary. I like, you know, as an artist, I love drawing because I feel like that's kind of the raw place where all the ideas happen. It's the creative drawing board where more of the refined nuances of how this thing was born are kind of strewn around versus the finished product. Arista, is this your drawing?
It's exact. It's charades, but with pictures.
Road. And of course, what is this? The Pope. So, you know, the thing is, sometimes I wonder, and this is just a thought, like maybe sometimes when we're not, like maybe we're making art all day. And then when we sit down to make art, we're not making art. I know it's a weird idea, but the reason I show the Pictionary is this kind of to point at that. And I'm interested in ideas like that. I'm interested in ideas that when you put on your adult, whatever hat and go to your studio, that even if you're there late at night by yourself, you still have like stacks of people on your shoulders and people speaking into your ears and really, you know, giving you a workover. Because as an adult, you have all these adult needs. You want to be cool, or you want to be smart, or you want to come up with something that your colleagues will like, or that your gallery will like. And I feel a lot of those things kind of switch the game. So I showed the Pictionary drawings as just kind of a freedom flag in my mind. So when I was graduating SVA, after that I went on a holiday to this remote part of Italy called Cisternino, and there was barely anything. There was electricity. We were in a stone igloo. It was a really awesome looking place. And we didn't have Pictionary, but we kind of made our own version of Pictionary. And my friend's wife was trying to get me to say paradise, like a paradise island. So she drew an island and a palm tree and a pair of dice. And I thought that was so funny because I really like wordplay, again, harking back to the Marx Brothers and specifically Groucho Marx, who literally lives off of reversals and wordplay. I went home and then made this painting. And so this is a painting of literally her drawing that I painted on Post-it notes that were put on a bed of cotton balls. So I called this painting Puffy Paradise. Now, when I went to SVA, painting was having one of its moments of its hiccups, or there was a lack of interest in it. I remember being there and seeing Matthew Barney. He had just graduated from Yale, and he came and he showed his wild videos, and I was like, whoa, this guy's hilarious and amazing. But I just mentioned him because, you know, people were really proclaiming the death of painting or the irrelevancy of it. And some people were, I remember at SVA, Arthur Danto came by and was even talking about the death of art. So I was a little bit frustrated because I wanted to paint. So what I decided to do was just jam strange things on the canvas to grab people's attention. So I'd go to Pearl Paint. I would get these small canvases, prefab canvases, not even take the plastic off, kind of to hint to the automatic nature of this, and then jam different strange materials on the surface. So this is Fruit Loops and nails. This one is Lucky Charms. So you can see that, you know, I used a cotton ball and tried to mimic like a cauldron of gold coins. There's erasers on there. There's the Lucky Charms. There's even Valentine hearts and Easter candy. So all of your basic needs, sweet needs. Now I would make these things. This one's a grid made out of marshmallows. What was a lot of fun is now making art became kind of like cooking. And I would make these things, and since I had a lot of them, I could also give them away. So I would send them out to the world and their merry homes. And slowly I would get stories back, you know, hey, Brian, you know, your painting has, spiders living in it. Hey, Brian, I went on vacation, I came back, your painting wasn't there, but on the floor there was a pile of mouse poop. So another thing is that these things are kind of like barometers. So during a day like this, they start to puff up but during the winter, they get all kind of skeletal and frozen. The thing that I like about using food materials is that they underlie, like, I feel like another one of those things that are on our shoulders while we're making art is preciousness. How do we get rid of preciousness? And that's been one of the things I'm constantly interested in. So when you're dealing with something that inevitably is going to rot, my attitude is more carefree and more whimsical. So now this is just a little bit side history. So while I was doing all this, I wasn't aware of Pierre Manzoni. So he's kind of the proto art povera artist. This is a piece that he made, a grid of cotton swabs. Here's another piece that he made with dinner rolls. Now we're back to the Puffy Paradise and this painting have about 15 years between them. But Puffy Paradise became kind of the bell that, like, now I wanted to return to Puffland. And I saw Puffland as this kind of comical, swollen, kind of fun, frolicky place that I would, like a kind of place where I would try to find everyday objects that made sense in this world and kind of smash them together. So the series is actually called and thank you. So this series here is, I'm not going to say it again, I promise you. Here's another one. This was in a recent show in LA, and I wound up really getting into privacy glass and privacy film. So this is something that would just be over some lights that I decided to build a still life of a folded chair inside. Here's a work that was made a couple of years ago. Again, with the idea of, puff of air. I'm also a very sweaty person, so I wanted to make paintings that would cool me off while at the exhibition. Like, who's the human waterfall? Oh, why? He's the artist. So here's the fan puff painting. All right, so these are images from actually an exhibition that hasn't opened yet. They're for a show in Berlin at the Tanya Leyden Gallery. And the show is called Circa Skippy. And I started to think about, like, I was interested in painting stacks of paper. So in this instance, I have this paper towel roll, which I started dyeing and stuff. But I started to think, since I was putting fans in these puff paintings, that I wanted the fans to move stuff. So the first thought was, why don't I make these scrolls? And this is a larger image of it. So the thing is that I'm very contrarian. It's also why I like Dadaism and Groucho Marx. And I love the idea of touching art. And I've made a lot of objects where you're supposed to touch them. For instance, like, I've spent a long time working making collages. And when I first exhibited some of my collages at Kenny Schechter's in Canada Gallery, they were like, we got to frame these up. And there's something about the frame that just kind of suffocated the artwork, or at least muted some of the wild nature of paperwork. So I started making collage books that I'd put on shelves or tables, and so the gallery goer would be invited to pick them up. So it was a way of kind of foiling this procedure. Don't touch the art. It's like, actually touch the art. So this is an instance where actually in the previous paintings, there are handles, because you can't really lean these things because of the bulbous thing. So I put handles in here. So in this instance, I put tissues.
I like it. There's tissues in it.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So this one's called Drinkable Imagery, and it's a whole long row of tissues. I started thinking of like the tissue as almost like frozen air. It's a way of showing this air quality, but it's frozen. And then I started to continue to riff, because I can't help but keep riffing. And I started thinking of the tissue box as the loser's torch. Because like, when do you go for the tissue? But when you're about to sneeze, or when you're crying, or, you know. And so I just thought it'd be really hilarious to have this thing where, remember, don't touch the art. It's like, touch the art, you know, and grab some tissues. I started to also think of like the idea of like the painting as being a tissue box holder, you know, which is kind of ridiculous. But okay, another thing that really interests me is like setting, like these are toddler busy boards, or sensory boards. And I don't know about you guys, but I kind of remember being awake in my crib and seeing the one that was flung over my crib, and it had bells and it had a rotary thing on it and stuff like that. So these became a big influence, and I looked at them almost as collages, inadvertent collages, in the same way that the Pictionary drawings could actually be very interesting drawings inadvertently. Okay, this is the last work that I'll be showing in Berlin. This one's called Silent Movie. So in the middle is a piece of privacy glass. Like, this is what the kind of glass that I had in my high school and elementary school bathrooms. And I made a still life behind that. And then it's flanked on either side by these kind of cheap LED fake fireplaces. And you can see on either side there are handles. And so in a certain way, where paintings people develop palettes and a language of colors working together. What's fun with this is that you can mix up construct a textural palette. So for instance, the surface of the privacy glass kind of vibes with the texture on the plastic casing of the actual fire logs, which then in turn react to these big kind of brooms, which I've dipped in paint. So they all kind of like speak to each other and melt into each other. And I think about looking at the fire as a kind of primordial occult thing. Like looking at a crystal ball, the idea is as you're skewering, you're kind of going into a different zone by drifting off into those variations, those plays of flickering variations. All right, so just to kind of hammer back into this whole idea of the philosophy of why I like destruction or absurdity as a means of creation. This is a show that I curated called Draw Gym, and the idea was I wanted to curate a show that was in 2 adjoining galleries. I wanted to cover the galleries from floor to ceiling with drawings, and the parameters I gave the artist was that I didn't want any color. I just wanted black and white drawings, and they were invited to make 2 series of drawings, one which would be put on the wall and the other one would be put on the floor. And not all the artists agreed to do that. And what was strange is the artists that actually did agree to do that, they all came back to me saying the same thing. They were like, you know, I finished my real drawing, and then I started working on the disposable drawing, and I like the disposable one better. You know, and that happened, the artists had come back to me multiple times and say that. And so I thought that was a really funny thing, and it had to do with my notion of why you would use food. in art. And I was mentioning this to Chris Martin, and he was mentioning that he had been to a residency. He had gone by one artist studio, that the artist was really upset, was really angry, and just said, I hate all this work. I hate my work. I hate life. I hate this. And he was like, well, let's have a bonfire and we'll just burn the work. And so then all of a sudden he gathers all these artists at night, makes this bonfire, and people are drawing these things to throw into the fire. But of course, what happened? People would be like, whoa, I can't throw this drawing out in the fire. This is a good one. No, you said it. So it's this weird place of where, over the mouth of destruction, maybe some pretty brilliant things it could jog you awake. All right, so this is another comedian that I owe a lot of inspiration to. His name is Ernie Kovacs. And here he is working on jokes in a tank of water.
It's Ernie Kovacs.
So Ernie Kovacs was working at the beginning of TV, and it's kind of wild to think of how wild the Wild West early TV must have been, kind of like the beginning of the internet. And his shows were things that went on to influence Saturday Night Live, David Letterman, The Muppet Show, all sorts of things. And his screwball comedy met the technology that was offered him at the time of TV. He did a lot of surrealistic and Dadaist things. So in this instance, he's, building a birdhouse underwater.
You could just put a picture of yourself up instead of.
Here's an instance where he's smoking underwater. He was good friends with Groucho Marx, and he also sported a cigar and mustache.
Wine at the bottom.
Now the question is, how did he make it smoke? Does anyone know? Anyone have an idea? The secret word is milk. So this is an instance where he would animate rooms, and so this is where you can see how it's Sesame Street and The Muppet Show kind of owe him. And he's animating this office room, making paper clips dance. And so here is a musical device that I made that definitely harkens back to this. This was in People Pie Pool. This is my can opener keyboard. Now, also another thing that I owe thanks to Ernie Kovacs is that at one point I decided, why don't I make a drawing studio in the shower? Why not? Right? What could go wrong? But it's the same idea of throwing things into the fire. But there is something unique about the shower. I did grow up in a Catholic school, even though I'm not practicing and not even, I think Jesus is probably a collage of that, some proportions. Maybe all religion is collage. But I think about the room as this place we go, and it's kind of a confessional chamber. We're confronting, it's like a kind of, yeah, it's a clean slate. It's a place where we go to clean our slate. It's a place that echoes. It's a place where a million little orbs of water are ricocheting all off over us, and we start to kind of maybe understand that we're all just ricocheting. So I did this to see what kind of thoughts would be unleashed in this area. And here's just some of the drawings that were made. All right, we're at the home stretch, folks. All right, so I really like to work really late at night. And the reason I like to work really late at night is I love the work that I make when I'm on my last leg, when I'm exhausted. And when that oh, that's not good enough is finally shut the fuck up. you know? And so I'm really like, what would happen if we really just acknowledged all of our first thoughts, like maybe a younger child would? So anyhow, I was in the studio late at night and I was kind of working on this collage and just kind of torturing it, putting too much stuff on it. And I had this idea that said, why don't you put it in a baker's pan, take all those items that you're deliberating, like where should they be, put the collage in, fill it with water, put the pieces, then throw it into the freezer and allow the freezing process to delineate where those things go. So I did that. I was really happy with it, but very quickly I started to realize that I didn't want to deal with imagery. So I immediately started to deal with strange products. Like this one is made with Aquafresh and hair gel. I also started to examine these frozen things as like stained glass. And the whole procedure was kind of like this fun, kind of weird kids science project, meaning I didn't know what I was doing. And I was just fooling around. And that was a great umbrella for creativity from my point of view. So what was interesting is that many times I'd have to it seemed like cooking. So for instance, when I made this piece with Aquafresh, I would have to put the Aquafresh down first and freeze it because it had to be hard before I started adding more liquids to it. But what wound up happening is when it was frozen and then I added the hair gel and the water to it, it started to crystallize. Whatever beautiful poisonous things or an Aquafresh started to make these elaborate and wonderful crystals, as you could kind of see there. So I jumped from there to really kind of grody food. This is cat food. And so this is cat food and 4 different types of hair gel. And actually this whole kind of procedure started almost as a performance. I would do studio visits, and at the very end of the studio visit, I would say, hey, you want to see something strange? And they go, oh yeah, sure. And I'd put on rubber gloves and I'd be like, oh, I'll be right back. And I would leave and come out with kind of a smoking piece of ice. And I would say, oh yeah, this is frozen cat food and hair gel. And they go, oh, you know, like, that smells, or that's disgusting. And then immediately I'd put it up to the light, and there this kind of frozen smelly thing would turn into some kind of pretty piece of stained glass. And so here's the item once frozen, and I'm photographing it on the roof. Now, what I didn't understand was, now this is the same piece a year later. What I didn't understand was that there's this thing called sublimation that happens in all freezers. This is the reason why your ice cream slowly disappears, is that your freezer isn't airtight. So you're constantly opening it, closing it, and the ice actually starts to evaporate. It goes directly from a solid to gas. So here is what this work looked like a year later. Well, when this happened, I was like, wow, I'm never gonna show this work. There's no chance. You know, and so now I'm going to just show you just a couple other pieces of, here's one of my more favorite works that I got in the Whitney. I thought that this was an abacus, but it actually is a foot massager. And doorknobs, it's a grandfather clock casing and some 70s game pieces. This is what this looked like a year later. Now, here is just a history, it's a very short history of some other artists working in frozen art. So this is Mark Quinn, and these are heads, portraits made out of blood. Now, these things didn't disappear normally because they were put in $60,000 airtight, made by Bugatti pedestals. Here's another interesting work by David Hammons. After a blizzard in the 80s, he set up shop in front of my old alma mater, Cooper Union, and he's selling snowballs. Now, what's interesting is that inadvertently, what was fun for me, this game of binding stuff with ice, in a weird way, underlined the aspect that everything changes, and especially art changes, and that we need institutions to take care of art or else it'll disappear. But I inadvertently fell into that. And I think that David Hammons' work kind of hints at the humor about that, trying to collect something which is almost impossible to collect. Now this is Fisher and Weiss, and when I was trying to solve this problem of sublimation, I had some friends who were working with this artwork. This is at the High Line, I believe, but it was also shown at the Sculpture Garden at the MoMA. How did this work? How did this survive? Well, I found out that actually it was a big nightmare. Some of it had to do with the electricity of it, and it was constantly melting. And I was like, well, how did they roll those big snowballs? And they're like, actually, it's an iron armature with a frozen film over it. But I felt a little bit better when I heard that other people were struggling. So this is back to just some images of these works. This is another aqua fresh. You can see the strange crystals. These are bent paper clips. Here's a hammer where I decorated the handle and then put some fireplace matchsticks and some blueberries. And this is how the installation looked in the Whitney. Now, the thing that wound up happening, which was really interesting, was the Whitney preparators had to buy a freezer. And they also had to remake the work. So it wound up being like cooking your grandma's dish or cooking a relative's dish. And so these things slowly changed over time, just a little bit, but they kind of got their hand in it. And it wound up being this awesome project where I really relied on them. And also the work actually got translated through them. And so I was really lucky because I had a preparator team that was so psyched to do it. They thought it was fun. So that's how that more or less ended up. And I think that may be it for just one more thing, is that actually I will be doing another lecture. I'm not sure when, but on Rhoda Kellogg. I've been an archivist of the Kellogg collection for the past 4 years. It's Rhoda Kellogg was an educator, an author, psychologist who collected over 2 million examples of children's art from around the world, and I will be talking about her specifically in the coming week. So I'd just like to bookend with another Groucho comment. Quote me as saying I was misquoted. Thank you so very much. Thanks.